Good morning. It's my great pleasure. My name is Kim Pate. I'm a senator. I live here in the unceded, unsurrendered, and unreturned territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe. I am overjoyed to be joined by my colleague and friend, Member of Parliament Blake Desjarlais, and we are here because last night the Senate passed Bill Bill S-230, which is a sequel to Bill C-83. And some people may not remember that Bill C-83 was the bill that was introduced by the government to get rid of solitary confinement in this country. That was in 2019. What we know now, 5 years later, is that it has not achieved that. In fact, it has renamed segregation, removed many of the previous oversight mechanisms. And in fact, the correctional investigator has talked about what an abject failure the bill has been. The Ministerial Advisory Committee, which is due to be disbanded at the end of this month, has said that it is a dismal failure and that it is unlikely to get better without external oversight. The independent external decision makers who were hired by the Correctional Service of Canada to actually oversee decisions and in law had the authority to overturn those decisions. A number of them have been let go. Their mandates were not renewed very recently. And what we are told is that is in large part because they refuse to rubber stamp corrections decisions. And so we're in a situation where there is very little oversight, an expansion of the use of isolation, and at the same time, virtually no remedies for prisoners. In addition, in the bill, in addition to oversight of corrections, oversight in particular of isolation, the bill introduces provisions that were actually what was supposed to be the way the bill was to be interpreted back in 1992 when it was first passed. It was actually the Corrections and Conditional Release Act was the first piece of legislation I worked on when I came to the Hill as a witness, a civil society witness, back in 1992. And at that time, it was a piece of human rights legislation aimed in particular at helping ensure that people who should not be in prison weren't there. Section 29 says people with mental health issues and health issues should be in health settings. This bill, Bill S-230, helps push that along and in fact puts in additional procedural requirements to help corrections push that along and ensure that resources are in place. Corrections was given millions and millions of dollars, and one of the things they said they would do with Bill C-83 was contract with provincial health authorities for mental health beds. They did none of that. We don't know where that money went. They also said they would hire mental health advocates. Now they say they are internal mental health advocates. So there are many, many issues. In addition, sections 81 and 84 of the Corrections and Conditional Release Act were put in place back in 1992 when it was recognized that the incarceration rates of Indigenous people was a crisis. Now we are at 3, 4, and 5 times the numbers that we of Indigenous people in our prisons, First Nations, Métis, and Inuit, and yet the provisions that were put in place have not been well used. And so in addition, in Bill S-230, we take what was supposed to be in place originally more than 30 years ago and say there's a responsibility on corrections to start to negotiate those agreements. I often say the way those agreements were the way those provisions were rolled out, where basically it was put in the law and then nobody told First Nations, Inuit, and Métis communities. Nobody told the organizations. And then they use that as a rationale to keep everything inside. So I'm so excited that Senator, or Member of Parliament Desjarlais, that you are taking this on because it's such a needed thing, and you have done such incredible work, especially with the women in the Edmonton Institution for Women. So I want to thank you very much for taking this on, and over to you.
Wonderful. Well, first of all, Tanse and Kinanaskam Tinawao to Senator Kim Pate for all her immense work, dedication to justice, and of course, future for Indigenous people where we can actually see a just society that involves and includes Indigenous people, but also finds ways to ensure that those, particularly folks like Tanya, an Indigenous woman who was kept in solitary confinement for 10 years and now has institutionalized induced schizophrenia because of the treatment she faced in these places. We need to see real action when it comes to the commitment made by the federal government. There was a promise made to Indigenous people, a promise made to Canadians that this kind of cruel and inhumane treatment of fellow human beings Indigenous people, the original stewards of this land that we know are way hyper and exceptionally overrepresented in prisons. We make up 32% of all people in custody, but just 5% of the population. This is a serious issue. When we think of a kind of Canada where everyone is to be helped when they fall down, this is the exact opposite. This is pushing people even further. The fact that Tona had to come to this place, bear her open wounds to all of us, to the Senate Standing Committee on Human Rights, and to plea for the very real changes that need to be done, like ending solitary confinement, because she is a real victim of the impacts of that immense, disgusting, and inhumane treatment. Indigenous women in particular in Alberta, we have a women's penitentiary there, federal penitentiary, that has women, Indigenous women from all over the country. I've been to this prison, I've met with women there, I've had roundtable discussions, and these women are victims so many times of the system that was said to give justice, but as a matter of fact, provided more harm. This bill, which I'm proud to sponsor in the House of Commons, to see passed swiftly, and I'll be working diligently with my colleagues across party lines to ensure that this bill, which should be a nonpartisan bill, because we should all care about what kind of future Canadians have, and we should all care about reconciliation with the Indigenous people, and we should all care that human beings in our country are being subjected to further and more worse conditions than the conditions that are otherwise already present there. This kind of treatment needs to end in Canada. We need to see the end of solitary confinement. It doesn't work. Canada committed to ending this practice in 2019. It still continues. We need legislation to change this because the Liberal legislation was ineffective and left too many loopholes. This would create a kind of justice for people like Tona. It would stop it so that people who follow in the footsteps of Tona actually had a fighting chance to ensure that they didn't just serve their time in these prisons, but they served it without further getting harmed. That's what this is about today. It's about ensuring that we tackle the very pervasive issues of overrepresentation of Indigenous people in prisons, the pervasive issues of lack of oversight for those who are in federal penitentiaries, in particular those in solitary confinement, and providing real solutions and justice for those persons who have become victims of this kind of treatment. Solitary confinement doesn't work. It harms people. It creates a longer life of pain. We need to see a kind of future where our justice system is restoring people, is helping them reintegrate into community, is helping them guide themselves to a kind of place where they can be leaders in their community again. That's the kind of future that Canadians believe in. Canadians believe in a compassionate future. Canadians believe in a system that reintegrates those who offend. And it promises that when you fall down, we'll help you get back up. That's the kind of Canada we believe in. That's the kind of Canada that reconciliation demands. And that's the kind of Canada that we know we can build. And this is the kind of bill that's going to help us to do that. We're happy to take any questions. Let's get any further.
Yeah. No, and I want to thank you for raising Tona. Well, last night, after the vote, the first thing she did was call me as she was watching the vote. Tona's now dying of cancer. The horrific reality is this is an Indigenous woman who went through 10 years of isolation and then had to be in the mental health system for another almost 11 years. And has been free and clear of the system for just less than 1 year and then diagnosed with terminal cancer. And so she said that she hopes before she dies she sees a law that would prohibit what happened to her. And in fact, the genesis for calling it Tona's Law was when we visited, and when I say we, the Senate Human Rights Committee visited her in the mental health facility where she was at the time. She talked about what had happened to her and how she'd been treated, and she said, you know, could you please pass a law that would stop this happening to anyone else? And when she was crying last night, she said to thank you and to give you a hug. So we'll give you a hug.
Aw, well, thanks so much, Tona.
And she is very grateful to all who are working on this. And as you said, people across party lines, even though many of them have told me they will likely be whipped, many are in agreement with this. And it goes back to the death of Ashley Smith and what we learned there. It goes back to many other issues. So thank you very much for taking this on. And
of course. And my message to my fellow parliamentarians as we debate this bill going to the House of Commons would be that a prison sentence should not be a death sentence. That's an incredibly important piece to this work. We're all human beings in this. We have to have compassion. We have to have care. And as lawmakers, that's our job, is to ensure that all Canadians, all Indigenous people, have an opportunity for fair and equal treatment under the law. And the cases that we're seeing, in the particular case of Tona, is disturbing and one that we have to prevent in all further circumstances. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And yes, all people, when people come back to the community from prison, we want them to come back not worse off, and because we all live in the community as well.
Exactly. We have to go to the same place. Yeah. Thank you very much. I'm going to finish this water.
Thank you. This concludes the press conference. Merci. C'est ce qui conclut la conférence de presse.
Okay.